Hey, I'm David Adelsheim. The story of Adelsheim Vineyard began in 1971. That was the year that Ginny and I decided to risk our life savings on a piece of property in Oregon's North Willamette Valley. Looking back now, we were one of just 10 families that made wine before 1980 from grapes planted on our properties in that region. To celebrate the 50th anniversary of what became our first vineyard, we wanted to tell our story. But we quickly realized that the only way to truly tell our story was to tell the stories of that entire first generation. Our winery team proposed an idea, a series of video conversations with the founders of those first 10 wineries and me. I loved it and set to work contacting my old friends. In each interview, we wanted to go beyond their widely known histories to discover who these people really were and what led them to build our uniquely collaborative, and at least from today's perspective, incredibly successful wine industry. This is our shared story. Fresh out of college in the summer of 1966, Myron Redford and a couple of friends found themselves hitchhiking from Istanbul to London. They ended up in Bulgaria looking for a hostel. Did I mention that Myron had an ulcer and had been told no alcohol? But their guide was pouring shots of slivovitz, and no thanks wasn't going to work. The next morning, after a long night of slivovitz shots, Myron was fine. So much for the no alcohol policy. On October 7th, 2020, we caught up with Myron at Amity Vineyards, overlooking the original vineyard he had purchased from Jerry and Ann Preston in 1974. Myron, thanks for opening up the vineyard for us today in the sense of contacting Ryan and kind of agreeing to make this happen. I mean, you grew up in Seattle area,
Yes.
right?
Yes. I was in Seattle, and after the time, and I graduated from Antioch College in '68 and came back to Seattle, and after a while got a job at the University of Washington. I was assistant to the vice provost for academic affairs, and while I was there, I started taking trips to the Napa Valley to continue my exploration of wine. And so I was very interested in wine, and my mother was a research librarian, and we were having lunch in the faculty club. And I heard these guys at the next table talking about vinifera wine in Washington State. So I just interrupted them, and I said, guys, what's this? What are you saying? Vinifera wine in Washington State? And they said, yes, yeah, we've been making wine at Associated Vintners for 4 years. I said, really? And they said, well, come on out. Associated Vintners was founded by a group of university professors, and they started out as an amateur group and ended up having to turn commercial because they bought a vineyard and it produced too many grapes. David, I ended up working with them off and on for about 2.5 years.
During that time with Associated Vintners, were you involved in the winemaking?
Yes.
Got it.
Yes. When I arrived in Oregon in '74, I had a lot of experience in the cellar. I had no experience in the vineyard.
You had a piece of property on the Olympic Peninsula in Port Townsend.
Yes. That's where I was going to plant grapes and put my winery because I had a barn we were going to convert. What basically happened is a friend of my mother's gave me a reference to visit Jerry and Ann Preston, who bought Amity Vineyards in 1970, planted it in 1971. Jerry and Ann got divorced, had to sell the vineyard. So when I came here in '73, '73, they weren't here. I didn't know how I was going to get my grape plants that I had bought from Jerry, Fort Port Townsend. Then he calls me several months later and says, "Hey, your grape plants are here. When are you going to pick them up?" And I said, "Okay, I'll come down and pick them up." And we came down, and that was happened to be the time on the weekend that the North, what were they called? The North Willamette Valley invited Ralph Kunke up from UC Davis to talk about sterile bottling of German white wines. And the whole industry was there. I mean, everybody. I mean, the whole industry could fit in this room, of course, because, and so I was just, here I was, this young kid, maybe 23, 24, and I'm in this room with all the founders of this industry. And then after the lecture, we went out and drank, and then we went and drank a little more, became more friends, and got back to the vineyard to pick up the grape plants. 3 Mercedes pulled up, and so I was digging up the plants, and Jerry's talking to them, and I said, "Jerry, you told me you'd sold the vineyard." He said, "Well, the sale fell through." I said, "Oh, well, could I make you an offer?" He said, "Well, I didn't think you had the capacity." And my mother, without me asking her, she just said, "Myron, okay, I'll mortgage the house." My God, Mom, you're going to do that? She said, "Yeah." So we got the money from the mortgage, and myself and my partner at the time, Janice Czechia, moved here in May of 1974. I had $10,000 that my brother, who had died in '73, had left to me, and this property, and I built that winery behind you there in 1976 for $15,000, plus the winery equipment that I had with it. And nobody could believe it, because even back then it was astounding. Yeah. So I've stored my wine on a cork ever since, and this is the process. And as I always tell people, I've never had a problem with it until I was in front of 300 wine writers in Newburgh, and my finger slipped, and I put it all up down myself. So, okay. This, by the way, is the first bottle of Gamay I ever made, which is the first Gamay in...
Probably in the U.S.
Yes, true Gamay.
Nice.
There we go.
And you didn't get it on your pants.
Yeah. So let's see, David. This is from 1988.
1988 Gamay Noir.
Gamay Noir.
Gamay.
Everybody knows that Gamay is an early grape and doesn't age.
Pretty nice.
Yeah, it is.
It's really Gamay-like. You weren't content with just a variety or a couple of varieties. I mean, you went first in the direction of Nouveau, and then when Gamay became available, you went in that direction.
Yes.
So what was your thinking on that?
I don't know. A lot of it probably was just, oh, that tastes good, let's try that.
We were latecomers to the Steamboat Conference. We didn't participate until the third year.
What?
Third year.
Yeah.
But you were there in the first year, right?
Right. I was part of the group that founded.
Who was that group, and what really is the Steamboat Conference thing?
Well, the key person who unfortunately has died is Steve Carey. Yep. Was the winemaker at Yamhill Valley, Mike Richmond.
And the guy from the Jim something from the Port Place?
Oh, Olson.
Jim Olson.
Jim Olson,
Yeah.
from became the Port Works.
Yeah.
And then the restaurant fellow that had the restaurant in Northwest Portland.
Bill McLaughlin?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. They were a group, and that's where the idea originated, from their sort of tasting together.
What was the idea that was put into practice that year, 1979?
What we wanted to do is to get Pinot Noir winemakers from all around, from everywhere, not just Oregon. So I think the first one we had winemakers from Oregon and California. And the original concept was we were going to have 1 year in Oregon, the next year in California, and move back and forth. The California part of it didn't work out, and everybody loved Steamboat. Is a small resort on the North Umpqua River, just 40 miles east of Roseburg. The center focus was no press was allowed. And it was sort of like an AA meeting in the sense that everybody could confess their sins. And people were encouraged to bring bad wine because the thing wasn't to have a beauty contest, it was to learn how to make better Pinot Noir. And I know you and I were on a panel in the LCBO had a Pinot Noir.
Liquor Control Board in Ontario.
Yeah, and you got up and talked about how you make Pinot, and then I got up and I
Said the opposite.
basically, yeah. I mean, our two approaches were, and it highlighted the diversity of approaches to Pinot Noir that exists in the state, and it also highlighted that the source, the locations where you get your grapes from, also influence how you make the wine.
What were those early years of being industry like? Who were your friends in the industry?
Ponzi and I were both cheapskates, and we respected the need to economize, so we started sharing equipment.
Yes.
And I had a 1952 Ford pickup, and I remember driving from here to Ponzi's, which is about 40 miles. I never went over Bald Peak when I was carrying, because we had a labeler that we were sharing, and it was top heavy, and it fell out of the pickup once. But anyway, Dick and I shared the equipment. He'd pick it up, I'd pick it up. Then we bought a filter together and did that. So I had a lot of interaction with Dick and Nancy and the two girls and Mikkel.
How did you acquire expertise in the field of viticulture?
Well, I think like most of my colleagues in the industry, we learned by making mistakes. And when you thought you'd made every mistake you could make, there was always a new one that showed up.
You had a strong focus of what was the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
And if that was being trespassed upon, there was a need for correction.
Yes. And well, you're right. I sort of was regarded as the volcano. And it's a little sad because, when you become the volcano, then people, instead of listening to what you're saying, just say, oh, that's Myron the volcano. I was always ranting and raving about the oak levels in the wine. And when I was on the wine advisory board, after we had formed a united thing and so forth, I was very vocal with my colleagues from the South. They were sacrificing things that were good for the overall state because it wasn't beneficial enough to them. And I got in some fairly strong arguments about that.
In the very beginning for you, was Janice actively involved in pushing forward all the work at Amity?
Yes. But the problem was, as I said, we came down with, I had $10,000 after our unemployment ran out. we didn't have any money. And, you know, it's one of the traits. You were a waiter. Ponzi was teaching. Erath was working for electronics. Woolstek the same. Most of us were small wineries, had minimal resources and had to work. And so Janice got a good paying job, and I had to find a job that would allow me the flexibility to be a wine grower. And so I ended up taking a job with the unemployment office. But Janice was the breadwinner in the family. She brought in the steady income. And as I said, in the early years, she was out there pruning with me and so forth. I met Vicki in September of 1980. And she became quickly involved in the sort of the marketing side. She was involved in the founding of IP&C, worked with that for several years.
And she was still working in medicine as well,
yes.
Right?
Yeah, she was a nurse.
Yeah.
Every time I'd say, she's got a full-time job, lots of money coming in, she would come and go back to school. She had a laboratory experience from being a nurse, and so she did the lab work, a lot of lab work here for me, and she had a very good palate and was involved in the blending decisions. The one other real major innovation, I made the first organic wine.
From today's position, it seems like a perfectly normal thing, but when you did it, it was
not.
And why did you do it? And
okay, it's interesting. It's sort of one of those happy accidents. We bought our present home in 1987, and we had about 5 acres of Italian prunes on the place. I wonder if there's a market for organic prunes, because my orchard had been untouched for several years, many years, and so I could qualify as an organic orchard right away. I didn't have to wait 3 years. So I went in and got certified as a orchard and found a way to sell my prunes for a while. And so I were talking about that. I was buying grapes from Bill Cattrall. Bill and Tom Cattrall have a vineyard over here. They have always farmed organically. And Vicki said to me, well, look, you got a source of organic grapes. Why don't you make an organic wine? And so we did in 1990.
what are we, 50 years after you bought?
74.
So not quite, 46 years.
48.
48 years?
46 years, you're
46
right.
years
Yeah.
after you bought. So was it a success?
See,
Was it a success?
it's had its ups and it's had its downs, but it's been, the industry's full of really good people. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much for today. Thank you for all your contributions to this industry that it is today. And what fun to be back here at Amity Vineyards, even just for this morning.
Yeah. And thanks again for you for doing this multiple winery presentation of your 50th year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we're very happy about this.